Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sister Charlene Herricks, a Sister of St. Mary of Oregon, and I'm currently serving as the Director of Membership for the National Religious Vocation Conference. And I'm joined by Carol Schuckschreiber, editor of Horizon Journal. Tonight we gather for the fourth seminar in our series called Religious Life Today. Learn it, love it, live it. Our webinars are inspired by the NRVC's 2020 study on recent vocations to religious life. Welcome, everyone. It's so good to have you with us.
As we move into this evening's program, we are really mindful of reports about our Catholic sisters, brothers, and priests who are in the Ukraine, accompanying their people during this devastating war. We want to dedicate this webinar to all who are suffering in the war, remembering in particular our brothers and sisters in religious life. And now Sister Charlene will lead us in prayer as we begin our webinar, Wellsprings of Support for Vocations.
Thank you, Carol. This is a prayer from Vocation Guidance, for Vocation Guidance from Vision. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God who formed me, your living waters flow within me. They nourish my love for your word. They inspire me to follow your Son and pour out my life for others. I am ready to further your mission. Help me find the best way to share my gifts in service to you. Giving you glory will be my greatest joy. In all that I do, may I proclaim your truth and give witness to your love. I trust that you will be ever present, coursing through me and quenching my thirst for your justice and mercy. May I forever be worthy of your life-giving call. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
That's beautiful. We now begin our program with our pre-recorded presentations. Our panelists will then join us for live questions and answers to follow. So keep your questions at the forefront and you can write them into the chat.
On behalf of the NRVC board, staff, and all of our members, I'd like to thank you for joining us for the fourth in our series of 6 webinars that focus on religious life today and the call to become a Catholic sister, nun, brother, or priest. Our webinar series is inspired by the NRVC 2020 study on recent vocations and is made possible through a grant from the GHR Foundation. In this webinar, our featured panelists will address Wellsprings of Support for Vocations, primarily through campus ministry and diocesan offices for youth and young adults. Both our speakers have taken creative approaches to vocation promotion. We are grateful for their taking the time to share their experiences, especially as they pertain to NRVC's recent study and proven ways to invite young people to consider religious life. Now, please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Sister Susan Kidd, a sister of the Congregation of Notre Dame, a former NRVC board member and currently the campus minister at Prince Edward Island University. Sister Sue.
As campus minister at the University of Prince Edward Island, I'm quite comfortable with the language and the lens of vocation culture. Live your baptism well, and your specific vocation will become clear, whatever that may be. The NRVC recent study of vocations to religious life found that many newer members of religious institutes contemplated their calling around the time of college. 70%, in fact, considered religious life by the time they were 21, and half by the time they were 17. We also know that 37% of newer religious learned about their community in an institution where members served. And an identical number, 37%, learned about religious life through campus ministry. The Canadian Catholic campus ministers borrowed and then modified that comprehensive model of ministry first formed by youth ministers. We have 12 pieces in our pie, and fostering a culture of vocation is one. Fostering an awareness of one's personal vocation and mission rooted in the new life received in the sacrament of baptism. So in my job description with the diocese and in our program planning on campus, we try to touch each of those 12 elements. In 11 years of campus ministry, we never hit 12 every year. But I believe that all that I do is about each element, almost like my baptism. Like my religious vocation. The witness of my discipleship is public and it's seen by many. All that I do is about that witness. But when I say that everything I do can be about vocation aspect, it runs the risks of, well, then what does it really look like? What is vocation culture like on my campus? I get to accompany young adults that the NRVC studied as those 6 out of 10 who are involved in faith outside of attending Mass. I have students who come to Mass on Monday when they missed it on Sunday because they were helping a classmate. On campus, we have our Catholic Student Association, and we go on an annual retreat weekend. Students are involved in the planning, and a popular topic is often prayer and vocation. So then my role as campus minister is to tap into the network of discerners with other young religious to offer input. And a popular question is, but how did you know? We try to offer witness talks to the 4 lifestyle vocations. I must say single life as a challenge, single life as distinct from those who are single while waiting for another vocation to emerge. We also offer a Lent Busy Students retreat, offering students the experience of spiritual direction and praying with scripture. Some directors are amazed that our young adult Catholics have never really prayed with scripture. They have a Bible from a teen encounter retreat our diocese hosts. They know devotional prayers, but a personal relationship with Jesus or knowing that they are unconditionally loved by God, not so much. Campus ministry has its challenges, of course, and one is our students graduate, so that 1 year's planning cannot be repeated the next year exactly the same way. 1 year, a group wanted silence, even more than we had initially put into the schedule. The second year, there was almost a mutiny when I suggested a prayer time leading to a silent coffee break. So it's also my role in campus to translate sometimes from English to English. An evening on decision-making drew a great crowd, people of different faiths and no faiths. Discernment was heavier and more specific to religious life, but the content can be the same. I get to listen to women who want to discern religious life as a vocation. They feel called to religious life, but are discouraged with the limited role for women in our church, or the church's understanding and teaching about sexuality and inclusion. I'm currently meeting with one young woman, a recent Catholic, who feels called to religious life, but gets discouraged. She loves the Mass and Eucharistic adoration. She appreciates the sacrament of reconciliation. But when the article came from Rome about clergy not blessing sin, she stopped her discernment with us and started looking to another Christian tradition. She's back. Through her theology studies, she's met a few feminist theologians. She's come across Catholic religious theologians and has found space for our conversation of her religious life discernment to continue. After One World Youth Day, one of our students came back having met a congregation of sisters not in our diocese. She met with me, I connected her with the spiritual director, and she made contact with that community. Finished her degree, has now joined that congregation as a postulant last fall. There was a young man in our diocese applying for the seminary. While I was not directly involved in his discernment, he did ask if we could meet as it was time for him to complete the inventory for psychological assessment. I was able to accompany him through that challenging time. There's also a newer member from my congregation on the campus. She teaches there. She has met with these 3 people that I spoke of. She offers a more recent experience of formation, perhaps an experience more relevant to those we meet. As campus minister, I get invited to speak at various social justice events on campus and off. Most recently, that included a Peace in Palestine rally. I was also invited to an anti-homophobic bullying candlelight vigil. I'm listed on the program as Sister Sue. Events not planned by me or by the Chaplaincy Center are just as important as the events we do plan. Our students have such varied interests and passions. How can I support them in their quest for meaning? Yes, by showing up, standing in silence, speaking at a podium, even sitting in the basketball bleachers. Religious life is there. I believe, though, that there's a gap in our transition moments of young adults, and graduation is one of those moments. We've created a welcoming, nurturing environment on campus. We accompany student leaders in their development, and we strive every day to make our world a better place. Then they graduate. Whoosh, they're gone. Some ask if they can come back to our liturgies and retreats. They haven't yet found their place, or they're having trouble finding their place in the local church. In an effort to respond to that gap, my community sponsored a supportive housing project called Visitation Place. UPEI graduates were invited to live in the house beside a CND community, and occasionally we shared meals, prayer, and outreach. When I shared the idea with students as it was taking place, the response was very positive. I didn't anticipate many of our local students, when they graduate, wanting to leave home and leave the province. The women who came and stayed were mainly international students, women from Kenya or Nigeria. A few locals joined them. The local pastor agreed to a weekly 6:30 p.m. mass, and the women would invite friends back to the house after for tea and continued gospel sharing. Not only were we part of their house, we became part of their community, part of their support network. It was their space, safe space. It became their church. It was an exciting time. 4 women are now married. 2 women have begun their young families. Visitation Place offered these women and their friends a place to shape an environment that suited their needs. And it lasted long enough to maintain its creative energy, its prayerful roots, and its social outreach. The global pandemic shifted a lot. After 4 years, the project has reached completion. The women remain involved in the parish, their relationships in the parish, the opportunities to serve as lector, Eucharistic minister, finance committee member, in hospitality before and after Mass. Space was created and they stepped in. They stepped up. I must say, too, others in the parish stepped aside to facilitate their leadership of these young adults taking root in their parish. By staying connected to the church, these young people have a better chance of a long-term commitment, whatever vocation they choose. Together is always better. Campus ministers and vocation directors share a passion for outreach to young adults and ministry with young adults. I was thrilled last year when a Canadian congregation's vocation committee reached out and offered online spiritual direction to our students. We have a local association of directors. They weren't as comfortable with the online format, so the offer met my need for our busy students retreat perfectly. When my own community agreed to host UPEI students in Honduras, pre-pandemic of course, I was able to connect with our Catholic Studies department and collaborate on a spring break mission trip. Part of my job description is a written report and a follow-up meeting with my bishop. I told him one year that I was having trouble making my report sound Catholic enough, and he reminded me that everything I do is Catholic enough. And today I say, everything I do is vocation culture enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Sue, for your continued witness and commitment to creating a culture of vocations in everything that you do. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Craig Gould, Director of Family, Youth, and Young Adult Ministry at the Institute for Evangelization in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Craig will talk about ways to engage families and young people around the topic of vocations. Craig?
Friends from NRVC, I want to thank you for inviting me to be with you today. And when thinking about today, there really were 2 words that came to mind for me. One was integration and the second was growth. So when I talk about integration, what I'm really talking about is the ability to vocation and vocational language and discernment to be part of every aspect of a young person, a young adult's life, be that their family life, their parish life and experience, their schooling, their profession, even the extracurricular activities. One of the things that we know about the current reality for families and for young people in particular is their life can be very fractured and very disconnected. I really see vocation as an opportunity to be a thread that weaves through all the different parts of their life, helping to be a great connector to who they are, a great integrator into the different aspects of their life. When I'm talking about growth, I'm thinking about the ability to move forward on the vocational calling and path. So if integration is to be able to kind of circle back around that thing that always keeps you centered, then the growth is the ability to move forward to be able to more fully live out that vocational calling for yourself and for the world, obviously. So these are the 2 aspects that I've been thinking about. Now on the practical side of things, what's that really mean? When we're talking about integration, I think the first thing we're talking about is what are the different communities that somebody is a part of. Let's start with the first community, which is the family unit, vocational language is a huge win for parents because parents are already concerned with how to help their young person be the best that they can be, to maximize their talents, their gifts, their abilities. And we see this right now played out really well in all kinds of areas for young people. They want the good life for their young person. That's what a parent wants. And despite the differences in what we have in definitions ultimately of what leads to a good life, that's a starting point with parents. Vocational language, callings and purpose and meaning and living out who you're meant to be and what you're good at, all of that starting language that we can use to begin conversations with parents. When I think about the next community of the parish community and parish leaders and what are they interested and concerned about, I think about language like evangelization and community, and mission, accompaniment, all those things that are really pressing on the life of a parish leader, and how vocational language comes along to help them access each of those different pieces that they want to get to. They want a young person to think about their own encounter with Christ and what that means and how it calls them forward and sends them on mission and gives them purpose and leaders and mentors who walk with them. The great news is that introducing vocational language to a parish leader is a way to introduce all of those different things. So how does that borne out? How do you live that out? Well, parish leaders then might be able to take vocational language and concepts and understandings and integrate them into things that they already have going on. Parishes do retreats for young people and young adults. They're preparing young people for sacramental life, whether that be marriage or for first communion or confirmations. All of that you can take, and without modifying and redoing everything, not having to give a whole separate retreat just on vocation. But if you're giving a retreat on confirmation, if you're doing a retreat on being prepared for marriage, all of that lends to very practical conversations about vocation and who you are. Summer service opportunities in particular, or weekend service opportunities, lend for chances for us to talk specifically about vocation and calling. And that's what I mean by integrating. We're taking the vocational language, vocational understandings, and introducing it to parish leaders where it can be introduced and brought into every aspect of things that they're already doing. I also think about our Catholic schools. I know the 2020 NRVC study on newer vocations really continued to emphasize and re-emphasize the significance that our Catholic schools play in response of our young people to vocational life. And I'm wondering about the opportunity to engage campus ministers, religion teachers, in the same way we might have engaged parish leaders around integrating vocational language, vocational practices in what they do, even in a religion classroom, on a service opportunity, at class retreats that happen in our Catholic schools. So again, those are opportunities where we can introduce religious vocation, the religious language of vocation into the different aspects of life that are already being lived out by our young people, by our young adults, things that are already being engaged in by our campus ministries, and maybe even engage them on ways that they do that. I know that there's been a dramatic shift in the past where our religious communities used to be on the forefront and integrated themselves into those different spheres. Well, in the absence of religious communities integrated into those places, at the very least, we can integrate the concepts, language, and understandings of vocation of religious communities to those places. That's what I see as a next step. Now I'm talking about growth. So after integration, growing means to be able to move those things forward. So how do we help young people do that? Well, on a very practical level, again, we can start with the family unit, and even on the youngest members of the family unit, I think of elementary age kids, we can just talk about introducing the very concept of vocation to them and what the different vocations are, right? Oftentimes, this is what happens in high schools. We do a vocation day, but I really think that's more suited to just introducing vocation at the very young age to our elementary age school kids. And then as we move into middle school, we can give young middle schoolers different experiences of vocation and people living out their vocation. Certainly our middle school kids have a lot of experience of seeing the vocation of marriage lived out, but what about the other vocations? What's their experience of seeing those lived out? And not just those particular vocations, whether it be priesthood or a sister or a brother, but also the ways in which those are lived out. It might be a religious sister who teaches at a university. How do our middle schoolers get an experience of seeing that? Or a brother who works at a soup kitchen. How do our middle schoolers experience that? And then what are they seeing and feeling when they experience that? High schoolers, I think about tapping into the different passions and growing in from just experiencing things to saying, what am I passionate about? What am I concerned about? Being able to live out that passion. College students, I think about the personal charism. What particular gift do I bring to that sense of calling, to that passion that maybe I've had? And then as a young adult, okay, maybe I've got a sense of passion and I've got a charism that I want to live out. But where's the community that will support me and help me to be able to actually live out that passion and that charism? And certainly through all of those, I think about the ability then to grow in our religious vocation discernment practices in each of those different areas. So in middle school and in high school, we're growing in our praying with the scripture about our own sense of calling. We're using Lectio Divina, doing reflection on experiences we've had, and then we're integrating wise counsel from other people, from people who are accompanying with us and we view as mentors. These are opportunities for us to grow in vocation. The other thing is to begin where people are. One of the things that's really fascinating in looking at that 2020 NRVC study is it talks about the call towards lifestyle and introducing lifestyle to folks. Previously, we've thought maybe about the importance of introducing mission, but one of the things it said is that although the ministries of the Institute, and I'm quoting here, are also important to most new members, they're less important than the spirituality, prayer, community, and lifestyle. We've certainly seen that uptick with experiences of come and see opportunities for young adults, right? And those are experiences of growing. And one of the reasons that it's so important, those come and see experiences and those community experiences are so important, is our young adults, by and large, have a really shallow experience of community. The world in which we live in, the values that it exposes are very individualistic. And so the experiences of community, even of personal community, because many of our young folks come from smaller family units, even of themselves. If families that had 4 or 5 kids in the past maybe have 1 or 2 now. The experience of getting to have and live in community are really central. The other reality we're recognizing right now is that 60% of Catholics under the age of 18 come from a Hispanic background. So what does that mean for us? What does that experience of community do for them? And then what's been that experience of community and life lived out for those young folks? And what is the reality of that Hispanic experience? How does that feed into what they have done and what they haven't been able to do with their own vocational calling? Finally, I would say this. The study shows that close to half of folks in that study are in their 30s, compared to just over a quarter of those folks in 2009. So, 30% of folks between the ages of 19 and 29 are in those newer vocationals, compared to just 16% in 2009. So 30% compared to 16%, that's almost a doubling. What that means for us is we have to accompany folks a lot longer through the process. This is a long accompaniment. And also, we're not going to see vocational yeses and commitments probably in the late teens or early 20s like maybe we did decades ago. We're going to see later commitments, just like folks are making later commitments all across the board. So it's how do we grow and accompany people through that whole process, because their commitments and their yeses are going to come in their late 20s and early 30s as compared to their late teens and early 20s, maybe even a decade or certainly in decades past. So I look forward to breaking that open with you more. And again, thank you for the opportunity, invitation to be with you, and many prayers and blessings for you on the ministry that you do.
Thank you, Craig, for outlining so clearly the ways we can integrate the concept of vocations among young people and help them grow in their understanding of God's call through their lives. So many great ideas were shared by our presenters. We have much to delve into and flesh out as we head into our question and answer session. We are so happy to have Sister Sue and Craig available for follow-up questions. Are anxious to learn more. Carol, where would you like to send the first question?
I'd like to give the first question to Sister Sue. Sister Sue, you have a broad sense of vocation promotion that stems from presence and witness. Can you explain a bit more how that works, particularly if someone doesn't specifically know that you're a religious sister or someone else is a brother or priest? How can they know that religious life is out there at some event? Any tips for religious, how they can make themselves known in that way?
Thanks, Carol. Great question. Thanks, everybody, for hanging in for the questions. I do think personally here at the University of Prince Edward Island and on PEI, I have the advantage that we're a smaller environment. I mean, small compared to some of the other larger centers across this country and yours. So I do think that the size of the population and the reality for me here is that people talk. And so Sister Sue does tend to be a known entity in the community of our campus and also here in Charlottetown and on Prince Edward Island. So the fact that I've been here now for 12 years, students will come into the chaplaincy center, and if I introduce myself, and they'll say, "Oh, you're Sister Sue." So there is something about that tradition, the oral tradition, if you will, of our church that continues on in time. And I also think too, I say yes to a lot of functions. I say yes to a lot of events. Probably too many, some of my friends would tell you. But I do think it's important that show up line is important. As a sister of the Congregation of Notre Dame, we wear this silver cross. We call it a simple silver cross. My family says it's kind of big, but it's that visibility. And I do use the handle sister. I'm Sister Sue. My friends call me Sue on campus, but I am sister. And it's that visibility and it's showing up. And it's a long-term thing. It's not a quick fix. It's about being around. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Sister.
Absolutely.
Very helpful. And I'm sure that when you show up, it's very encouraging for the folks. So
it's never quiet. Go ahead.
Next, Craig, Sister Sue's discussion of witness and presence dovetails nicely with your ideas on helping young people grow in their understanding of vocations. Can you share some of the ways that you've been able to work with parents and teachers and young adults to help them learn the language of vocations and eventually have them meet men and women in religious life?
Yeah, one of the things I think about when I talk about that approach, and I think it's really what Sister Sue's doing is embodying it, right? Which is so incredible. She's embodying that vocational call, and everywhere she goes, she talked about earlier, right? Like I'm living that vocational call everywhere I am. And I think about some of our parents or teachers and our young adults, sometimes they have not, because of the way that they've grown, they actually haven't stopped to consider what they're doing as a vocation, right? And sometimes as parents, that might be as a parent, right? How is that a calling? They realize like, well, one day I was a parent, like that's just what happened, right? So you get a chance to break out with them and say, well, what has that meant to you to be a parent? What have been some of the joys, some of the struggles, right? Where have you found meaning in being a parent? Doing the same thing with teachers, right? Helping them to see. Now, we've got a great, we've got the opportunity and teachers can often hear how well they're valued. But I think more than that, it's not an external evaluation of somebody saying, hey, you're doing a good job. It's a teacher saying, why do I find joy in this, right? Why is this something that actually stirs me, that gets me excited? Am I drawn to thinking of what could I do with these fifth graders today? Or what kind of lesson could I use with these eighth graders to draw them into social studies more, right? There's a passion there. And a lot of our folks haven't considered that. And I think the trickle-down effect is once teachers, parents, and even young adults that we engage in, once they start to think about those things, then actually they start to ask them themselves of the kids that they're raising, the children that are in their own house. They start to ask them of their fellow teachers and of the students that they're interacting with in classrooms. So it's really that sense of embodying. So it's not, I think, as oftentimes it can be, but it's really saying, hey, tell me about your call, your vocation. And boy, that piques something in them where they get really interested, like, what? I've never thought of that before. And that introducing a new way of thinking, new language, right? New way of processing internally what's going on with them, new appreciation for that call for them. That leads them, my experience is it leads teachers to say, hey, how could I do this with my students, right? Or parents to think, I've never asked that of my kids before. I wonder what they would say if I asked them, like, hey, why are you passionate about that thing? Why are you so passionate about art? What is it about art that draws you in? That ability to model for them the type of question asking is really powerful. And I think really opens up the doors for opportunity for them to become the people who start asking the questions.
Thank you, Craig. What a beautiful concept, that idea of really playing on using that same vocational language to talk about vocations across the board, because that gets everyone to think about, gosh, what stirs me? What gives me joy? Why do I want to get up early in the morning to do this ministry, to do this thing I do? It's beautiful. So now I want to send a question your way, Sister Sue. Can you explain a little bit more how you established the housing project that you helped fill in when you saw that gap left in connection after graduation, how it was funded, how'd you go about inviting these young people to the program? Were there ways you saw this being adapted in parishes or high schools? Tell us more.
Sure, happily. It was something because I live in a duplex. We're on half, and our neighbors, and the neighbors, one day we were out raking in the fall, and he said that they were moving, and all of a sudden something twigged in me about us having both sides of the house. And it was just this, it was very quick. It wasn't that I had been pondering for days and weeks and months. It was just the spirit, bang. And I started dreaming about knocking out walls and opening up spaces, and friends were like, all right, slow down, calm down, take a deep breath. But it was an opportunity. So that would have been in the fall, and it took until the following August before we actually made it happen. But it was an opportunity to share the dream. I spoke to some of the students at school, like I mentioned, and people thought it would be good, that they go to the parish, and if they're not, engaged in counter or baptismal prep, or like, they really didn't find much for them at the local parish. So we thought if we could create a community environment, and it was financially shared. The young women who came paid rent. Our community subsidized it a little bit. We used the same Wi-Fi signal across the two houses. We shared the costs. We had a contract where we all agreed that there was a lease in our name. It was an opportunity to really create a space that was about young adults, and it was very clearly, and some people thought they were going to join. People in the neighborhood said, the new nuns. The new nuns were out shoveling, sister. And I was like, well, no, they're not new nuns. They're women who are coming together to live this style of life. And I mean, a few of them are married now, and I don't know where God's calling the other couple, but it was an exciting time as people came, and we used social media to tell people about the project. It had a bit of a buzz in my own congregation, but as well in the diocese here. It was a neat opportunity for us word of mouth was the big way of advertising it. Social media was a strong way to keep it happening. And huge shout out to the people in the parish who created space for them too. It really became, and now the project isn't anymore, but my neighbors, there's two older women who live across the street, and now there's a group of men who live next door, nothing connected to us, but they say, now sister, that house has changed a little bit. What's going on in that house, sister? And I say, it's not me. But it was a moment of time to help people come about, to help people create that space. And I wonder sometimes in our, as we move out of our larger residences, our older convents, or as our rectories, it takes one person, that time it was me, but it takes one person with a dream, one person with a passion and a commitment, and then the support of a community, both my congregation, but as well as the people coming out of the University of Prince Edward Island, and the parish. It started with a spark. It started raking leaves, but then it grew, and it had a good run. It ran for 4 years, and the wisdom of several people said, it's had a good run. We wait for something else to emerge now. Let's not try to drag it out, to squeeze it out. Let's acknowledge the gift and move forward. So it was great. I can talk about Visitation Place forever, but I'll stop now.
Thank you, Sister Sue. Your enthusiasm is contagious. We appreciate questions coming in from the chat, and we're anxious to try to get those answered as well. And so, Craig, how did you get into really thinking about integrating vocations into all aspects of parish and family life? And another question that was brought up was about vocation committees, as well as what is available through the curriculum for elementary schools or middle schools or high schools regarding religious life vocation. In some cases, I know high schools have had courses on marriage, but what about religious life? So Craig, could you take that, please?
Yeah, certainly. First of all, can I just say, Sister Sue is fantastic, and I love the visitation house idea. And I'm probably going to borrow what we call steal, but borrow in a in the religious sense, to use that. I love that idea, and it's a beautiful picture and image. So, when we think about kind of across the spectrum, listen, my job, as you can see from the title, right? Like the job is family, youth, young adult. I basically say my job in Baltimore is if you're not clergy, you're mine, right? So like, that's my job. And when I look across the spectrum, I've got to think, what can I do really well that could influence across the board, right? What can I focus on that would have an effect in all of the different areas that my job calls to be responsible for, and that the catechetical leaders who I'm called to support, the youth ministry leaders, the college campus ministers who fall under my domain also, right? The young adult ministry leaders who fall under my office, marriage and family support, right? All of those things. When I think of all those different aspects that fall under my office that has responsibilities, I think vocation is the access point for me for all of those different things, because the language is so flexible, and I can talk about everything from as broad a vocation language as possible, where I've talked about, you heard me talk about passion and joy, and right, what are those things that just they really stir you, right? But then all the way down to what's the specific state in which you're called to live out that vocation, and what's the community you're called to live that within. Is that a religious community? Is it a family community, right? Is it many young adults in their 20s are called to live in friendship communities, which is something that Sister Sue just described, right? Visitation House was a community of friends, as well as having a relationship with her religious community. So for me, that, and I know that type of language also is something I can sit in front of a pastor, a DRE at a parish, a youth minister who's there, a college campus minister, and I can talk about that, and I can make connections to the things that they're interested in seeing happen within their communities. So for me, I find that vocational language is the most flexible language possible. It's the most applicable thing that I can sit in front of and talk with anybody who sits in front of me about. And as I talked about, like in the video, and then we can talk about the different ways that we can present vocation language and vocation experiences, whether you're in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, young adult, right? So I think that's great. The other question I remember was, there was a question about teaching in school and how, like, is vocational concepts and language and understandings taught in our schools. You may or may not be familiar. It's more years ago now that I want to remember, because it came out while I was, I think, working somewhere else. But there's a doctrinal framework that actually lines up and guides and directs a lot of what our high schools teach. And given that so many of our folks who are answering vocational calls are coming from high school settings, this is important to know. The unfortunate part for me is there's kind of a 4-part system that guides how they teach. And usually the schools will take them one a year, right? The first part freshman, second part sophomore. Vocation is not part of that. It's actually kind of like an addendum. I'll put the link up in the chat of the where you can find the directives. And those are really directives for publishers. But you can see that in that, I think it's Appendix D is the one on like vocation, right? It's calling and what to do with your life. So I would say you can't wait on that to become something that just happens and that's going to get focused on. But I think the conversations with your religion teachers can focus on, I know, like my own daughter who goes to a K-8 Catholic school here, one of her religion teachers practices the daily examen with them. And actually, sorry, I back up. He's a history teacher. So it's even better, right? But he is doing a practice with her that's allowing her to review her day and where was she kind, where she was generous, where maybe she needs to ask for forgiveness. That's an opening of possibility to then talk about, hey, when you see these patterns in your life, what are the patterns in that bring you joy? And conversations with that history teacher, with our religion teachers, they can be 5-minute snippets at the beginning of their class time that you could even suggest. And I would say, do it. Like, hand them a piece of paper that says, hey, ask these questions, because they're teachers and they're going to get caught up in curriculum and checking the things they need to check and make sure students are learning, getting grades done. They love it when you say, here's the thing you could do with your students, right? Most teachers I know don't find that offensive at all. They find it supportive. And if you would say, hey, I think this would be good for your students just to think about who they are and what they're called to do with their life. I tell you, every kid from when they're 4 years old on up is being asked, what do they want to be, right? And it only intensifies. So if you can help a fifth grader who's going to go into middle school soon and help a teacher engage that way, an eighth grader going to go into high school, a senior in high school who's going to graduate, certainly Sister Sue knows this, a college student who's about to graduate and suddenly they got to go into the real world and now they got to adult, whatever that means, right? If you can help some of those folks in tune those practices into what they're already doing, that's a huge support system for them.
I want to
Thank
put
you.
Thank you, Craig. That was really very interesting and very helpful. I want to put in a little ad right here for the NRVC store. We have some resources that I think would be very valuable for you. And I got a little push from Maureen to mention some of these things. One of them would be a vocation vocabulary book, so that might help teachers or other people that you are trying to encourage. We also have a pamphlet that's called 10 Questions Frequently Asked. And for parents, one it focuses on parents and one focuses on people in general. And, as we're working today with so much social media, I think it's really important that your media department in religious communities know vocabulary. They can't do a good job with your website about vocations unless they know good vocabulary, accurate vocabulary. So you can just go to the nrvc.net website and check on the store for some very reasonable priced resources that will help your ministry.
Yes, thank you also, Craig. I feel like we should give you a special reward just for actually knowing that vocations are mentioned in Appendix D. Wow. But thank you for that beautiful vision of how to really integrate vocation without starting anything new. That's the really great good news too. Sister Sue, I want to direct our last question to you, which is if you could just tell us a little bit about all those different campus ministry events that you've hosted, which have been the most successful in attracting young people? And how do you bring a vocation element to them if they're not already specifically vocation related?
Great question. I think in in highlighting the events, I can hold out the ones that are deemed popular or successful. And there's lots of others that, 2 people, 1 people, 0 people show up to. But I think perseverance is part of just keep going. It's not about numbers. It's about being present. I think that the universal truth that I have found, though, in all of our activities, if there's free food attached, young adults will come. And especially university students. I find we have Soup for the Soul events, and those are for the campus community. Those aren't Catholic events, but Sister Sue does get up and welcome people. And I don't hesitate to use the language. Craig's been talking a lot really well about the language of vocation, to talk the language of, and I say to them, this event is feeding your belly. I hope it touches your heart. I will pray. We do them during exams. We do them monthly. I will pray for you. This is, our building is for, our mandate is for religious harmony and spiritual well-being. So it's a publicly funded university. I'm hired by the Catholics to be there. I'm the only presence on campus. So it is to use the language of faith, to use the language of vocation, to not assume that everybody is going to get married. I think that in these smaller, sometimes rural settings, it's like the default switch goes to married life. But to be able to say, what's your passion? To use I do have that book, Sister Charlene, I have that vocabulary book on my desk. Now, it could be buried under a few things, but to use the language of vocation with them, the same way I would talk about a basketball game, the same way I would talk about, to use the language of my religious congregation. They know that I was at meetings last summer for my religious congregation. They know that when sisters come from out of town, that they're going to stay and visit. And I'm going to bring them to campus because I want that to be a part of what my sisters, how they see us, but it's also how the students see my congregation. So I may not be hitting them over the head with religious vocation language, but I am working it into conversations daily. If you speak to the sister who teaches at our campus, she never considered, she teaches in our engineering faculty. She didn't know that being a science engineering prof could go with religious life until she met us. My community is based on liberating education. It was just like she had this aha moment, come to Jesus, literally, not figuratively even, through conversation. And there probably could even have been a glass of red wine or two at the table at the same time. But that's why I used to teach in a high school. Now I like being with older young adults, kind of, because it's that sense to be able to share that with people. It's about relationship and it's about language, I think. I get a little excited.
Thank you, Sue. That's very, very helpful for sure, and very inspiring for what we can do next. Craig, you mentioned in some cases, but not in all cases, that we must accompany people a little bit longer than we used to. And do you see that with the diocesan programs, that there's involvement with the parishes then to help you with that? Or is it kind of like not too much on their plate?
Yeah, one of the gifts of having the many different responsibilities of my office is that I do get to have a consistent message, right? So we don't have to worry about silos. I'm the silo. It's just me. So there's no worry about people and operating separately. But what that does do is it does actually, I joke, but it gives me the opportunity to talk to our campus ministers, our college campus ministers, about whether or not they're connected to our high school campus ministers, our high school youth ministers, in terms of people moving out of high school, coming into college. And then when people are moving out of college, young adult ministry responds to me as well, right? So who are the folks coming out of college and are they connected into parish life? Sister Sue mentioned earlier, sometimes our young adults have a really hard time finding their place in a parish. And so I have the ability to have them connect across that. And I do think that's crucial, because when the average age of marriage for folks now, for women is in their 27, 28 range. For men, we're up to 29, almost 30, which means that they're even engaged in family life later. But I think that reality has a spillover to all vocational callings, right? It's not just the married vocation, but it's this across the board. And oftentimes we decry that, right? There's a sense of people being like, oh, it's just people, find out what they want to do with their lives earlier. And I think it's a beautiful opportunity to embrace exploration. Like, our young adults are getting an opportunity to explore for years what they want to do, who they want to be, how they want to live that out. Again, the community with which they want to live that in, which, as an aside, I will say that's actually a unique perspective that young adults don't often consider. And again, to Sister Sue's point, the fault is often marriage. If you can point out to a young adult that that's a community you're choosing that community, but there are alternative communities that can be absolutely fulfilling and bless your life. I say that as a dad of 7 kids, right? Like, I love my married life. I love my crazy kids, but I have beautiful friends who are living their religious life and their community. There's holy envy at points where I'm seeing them with their community and I love their community. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could be part of that community, but also be married, right? And so I think if we put those things before our folks, and we have to accompany along that path, because the decisions are coming later. Statistically, this is just where they're at. But it does push us to say, how do I cooperate? How do I befriend somebody over a number of years? And then how do I stay connected to all the different touch points that a young person and then a young adult might experience, right? Do I know local youth ministers? Do I know local high school campus ministers? We talked about the importance of school. Depending on where you are, Baltimore has a lot of Catholic schools, right? So we've got 19 Catholic high schools. So it's really important for our folks to have a touch point with the campus ministers who are influencing and being part of the calling experience of our young people who will become our young adults at our universities. So those are the ways I think about being able to follow through with that. And I would say this, as a diocesan person, push your diocesan person that vocation is an opportunity for them to connect across these groups, really push them on that, because it is so true. And it's going to fulfill the needs that their boss is going to ask them. How are you doing this? Where are you doing this? It can actually make their job easier, makes their job better, and utilize that desire that they have. A diocesan director has a desire to connect dots across the spectrums, because usually it's part of their job description. So use the desire that they have to be able to build those relationships that you want to see built across your diocese and the practices of vocation that you'd like to see.
Thank you so much, Craig and Sister Sue. So many good ideas, and there are some in the chat box as well. So I hope you have a chance to check that out as well. And then you can also find ideas on the NRVC website. And if you're a member, you would be able to get more ideas at member area meetings at the Summer and Fall Institute. And this fall, the biennial convocation will be taking place in Spokane, Washington. But if you're not a member, that's not a problem. Just go to nrvc.net and sign up.
That's right. You can sign up for any of those things on our website. And remember also that one of the benefits of membership is a subscription to the award-winning Horizon quarterly journal that I work on almost every single day. And of course, don't forget to use Vision in your ministry, a proven resource in promoting vocations.
Before we turn it over to Phil Loftus, we'd like to give a special shout out to Patrice Tui, Vision Publisher, Curtis Long, NRVC's Web Director, and Marge Argelin, our Director of Database Administration, for their behind-the-scenes help in producing this webinar. The leader of the GHR webinar project and the coordinator of those just mentioned is Mr. Phil Loftus, Director of Development for NRVC. So God bless you all. And now, Phil, please take it away.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the National Religious Vocation Conference, I want to again express my thanks to all of our panelists, to tonight's MCs, Sister Charlene and Carol. I also would like to thank all of our NRVC members who are present, all of our current and past NRVC board members, our member area coordinators, for all of their continuous participation, encouragement, and support of vocation ministry. It's so good to see so many familiar faces, and I'm so thankful to have been a participant of tonight's gathering. We're thankful to each of you who signed on to make this a success. As of this webinar, we have had 775 registrants, which is great. We know that vocation ministry is a specialized ministry, and we know that you are rewarded, not all days, but most days. So we're grateful for your labor in the vineyard. We hope that this series brings you together and helps you get ideas that will help you in your collaborative efforts to build vocations for the church. We want to offer our continued thanks to the GHR Foundation, who brought forth the NRVC 2020 study on recent vocations. From that study, they allowed us to bring forth a story map, which is available on the NRVC website. You can go to nrvc.net or access the link in the chat box. It's a great tool to see updated information in regards to religious life and those who have entered the last 15 years. We hope that you're going to join us on April 21st for our 5th webinar. It's titled Addressing Parental Concerns, Wisdom and Advice, in which we'll feature several parents and young religious. We'll send each of you an email with registration information, or you can go to our website, nrvc.net, to find out information on not only webinar number 5, but also our last one, number 6, which will be in June. In addition, this webinar will be featured on our YouTube channel, along with the past webinars. We invite you to go back. So much good information shared. We've had to date over 1,000 views, and we're so encouraged by people referencing these webinars and this study. I want to make a pitch for all of you who encounter young people that are discerning of vocation, who may have educational debt and are encumbered by that or burdened by that. The nfcrv.org application period is currently open. It will be open through April 22nd. The institute where people are discerning are able to make an application and submit it. And to date, we've helped close to 50 individuals enter religious life, and we've awarded over $1 million in grants. And I was so pleased to see Sister Catherine Frazier, one of our grantees in tonight's webinar, along with one of our board members, Sister Michelle Fisher. So just a shout out to anyone who has a need. Vocationfund.org is the website for that. As we enter the Lenten season, we wish each of you God's blessings and mercy leading up to the glory of Easter. We hope that you have a good evening, and we invite you all to unmute yourself and say goodbye. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Farewell from Texas.
Good job, Sue.
Come on up, Bridget. Good to see you, Sean.
Good job. Thank you.
Lots of Toronto.
Okay,
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
take care.
Thanks, Rosemary Brasso, did I?
Thanks,
Good
Craig.
being
Great
with
to
you,
see you
Craig.
again.
Thanks.
Good to
Craig,
see
I hope
you.
you have a big desk in your office.
God bless.